Some families are built with love, not blood. When Chris Pratt walked onto the Tonight Show stage with that boyish charm and infectious smile that had made him America's favorite leading man, nobody expected him to reveal the most heartbreaking secret of his fatherhood journey. Jimmy Fallon had planned a lighthearted interview about Chris's latest action film. The audience was ready for the self-deprecating humor and wholesome energy that always came with a Chris Pratt appearance. But what Chris was about to confess would silence Studio 6B and prove that sometimes the most important auditions happen in foster homes where children wait for someone to choose them. The cameras were rolling. The audience was already charmed by Chris's endearing presence, and then he spoke 9 words that changed everything. Every child deserves to know they're wanted by someone. What came next wasn't just television. It was a revelation about belonging, hope, and the sacred responsibility that comes with understanding what it means to be chosen when others have been forgotten. Chris Pratt had always been known for his genuine warmth and family values. The actor who spoke openly about faith, fatherhood, and the importance of being present for the people you love. But what audiences didn't know was that Chris's understanding of family had been shaped by his own childhood experiences with feeling unwanted, and that understanding had awakened a calling to ensure that no child would face the abandonment he had once feared. The foster home visits had begun 6 years earlier, during a particularly reflective period after Chris's divorce, when he was struggling with questions about family, belonging, and what it meant to be a good father. Despite his success and the love he shared with his son Jack, Chris had been haunted by memories of his own childhood insecurities and the fear that he might not be enough for the people who depended on him. Growing up, I spent a lot of time feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere, Chris later explained. My parents divorced when I was young. Money was always tight, and I carried this deep fear that maybe I wasn't worth keeping around. Even after I became successful, that fear never really went away. The inspiration to visit foster children had come during a conversation with a social worker who had mentioned the profound isolation experienced by children in the foster care system, kids who had often been removed from abusive or neglectful homes, only to find themselves in a system where they felt more like temporary inconveniences than beloved family members. She told me about these kids who age out of foster care at 18, having never experienced what it feels like to be someone's first choice, Chris remembered. They go through life believing that they're fundamentally unlovable, that there's something wrong with them that makes them unwanted. That hit me right in the chest because I recognized that feeling. Chris's first visit to a group home in Los Angeles had been overwhelming, meeting children ranging from toddlers to teenagers who had all experienced trauma, abandonment, and the particular pain of being moved between temporary placements without ever finding a permanent family. But what had struck him most was not their resilience in the face of hardship, but their hunger for adult attention and affirmation. I met this 8-year-old girl named Maria who asked me if I was there to adopt her, Chris recalled. When I explained that I was just visiting, she said, "Oh, okay. Nobody ever comes just to visit." That broke my heart. These kids are so starved for adult attention that they can't imagine someone spending time with them without an agenda. That first encounter had inspired Chris to develop a regular schedule of visiting foster homes, group facilities, and residential treatment centers throughout California and wherever his filming schedule took him. Unlike celebrity charity events, these visits were completely private, arranged through social workers and child advocates who identified children who might benefit from positive adult interaction. I realized that what these kids needed most wasn't money or gifts, Chris explained. They needed to experience what it feels like when an adult chooses to spend time with them, when someone shows up just because they matter, not because they're trying to fix them or move them somewhere else. Chris's approach was characteristically genuine and playful. He would spend entire afternoons with groups of foster children, playing games, telling stories about his own childhood struggles, and most importantly, listening to their experiences without judgment or attempts to minimize their pain. I tell them about growing up feeling like I didn't fit in, about being the chubby kid who got picked last for teams, about my parents' divorce and how I worried it was my fault. Chris shared, when kids see that someone they admire from movies also struggled with feeling unwanted, it helps them understand that their current situation doesn't define their worth. Over 6 years, Chris's foster home visits had reached 89 children across dozens of facilities. Some were short-term stays while children waited for placement. Others were long-term residential facilities for kids who had been deemed unadoptable due to age, behavioral issues, or special needs. I've met kids who've been in 15 different foster homes, teenagers who've given up hope of ever being adopted, siblings who've been separated and just want to be together, Chris said. Each story breaks your heart, but it also shows you the incredible resilience of these kids. They keep hoping, keep trying, keep believing that someday someone will want them. The visits weren't always easy or uplifting. Chris had encountered children who were angry, distrustful, or so damaged by their experiences that they couldn't accept positive attention. Others had tested his commitment by acting out or pushing boundaries to see if he would abandon them like so many adults had before. I met this 13-year-old boy named Marcus who spent our entire first visit trying to make me leave, Chris remembered. He was rude, aggressive, kept saying things designed to shock or offend me, but I stayed for 3 hours, and by the end he asked when I was coming back. He'd been testing to see if I would stick around when he wasn't perfect. The emotional impact on Chris had been profound. Regular exposure to childhood trauma and systemic abandonment had deepened his gratitude for his own family while strengthening his commitment to breaking cycles of neglect and abandonment for vulnerable children. These visits changed how I parent my own son. Chris reflected, when you see kids who've never experienced unconditional love, who've been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect them, you realize how precious it is to have someone who chooses you every day. Chris had maintained contact with many of the children he'd visited, attending graduations, birthday parties, and other milestones for kids who often had no other adult advocates in their lives. Several had aged out of foster care and considered Chris a mentor figure who had helped them believe they were worthy of love and success. I got a text last month from a girl I met 5 years ago when she was 14, Chris said with obvious pride. She just started college and wanted to thank me for showing her that adults could be trustworthy. She's studying social work because she wants to help other foster kids the way people helped her. Tonight's appearance on The Tonight Show was supposed to focus on Chris's latest action film, which featured themes of family loyalty and protecting those you love. Jimmy had planned to discuss the film's stunts and humor, maybe explore Chris's approach to balancing action and comedy, definitely tap into the wholesome charm that made him such a beloved guest. The interview had started with Chris's characteristic enthusiasm and humor. He had shared funny stories from the film's production, discussed his physical preparation for action sequences, and charmed the audience with his self-deprecating jokes about his transformation from chubby comedian to action star. But when Jimmy asked about how fatherhood had influenced Chris's choice of roles, particularly his attraction to characters who protect family, something shifted in Chris's expression. The question had been meant to explore his artistic evolution, but it had touched on something much more personal that Chris had been considering sharing publicly for the first time. You know, Jimmy, Chris said, his voice taking on an unusual gravity, becoming a father taught me that family isn't just about biology. It's about choosing to love someone unconditionally, about showing up for people who need you, about making sure no one feels abandoned. The audience grew quieter, sensing that Chris was moving into territory that was more serious than his usual lighthearted responses. That sounds like you've learned some profound lessons about family, Jimmy said, genuinely intrigued. Chris was quiet for a moment, his usual animated energy replaced by thoughtful reflection. I have, but not just from being a dad. I've learned from kids who've never experienced what it feels like to be someone's first choice, who've been moved from home to home without ever finding a place where they belonged. The studio was completely focused on Chris's words now, the energy shifting from entertainment to something much more meaningful. "Are you talking about foster children?" Jimmy asked softly. Chris's eyes filled with tears, a sight that was particularly powerful, coming from someone known for his strength and optimism. "For the past 6 years, I've been visiting foster homes and group facilities, spending time with kids who are waiting for families that might never come." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing a side of Chris Pratt that transcended his celebrity, the raw humanity of someone whose success had awakened him to the needs of society's most vulnerable children. "Jimmy, can I tell you about something that's become the most important work I do?" Chris asked, his voice growing stronger despite his tears. "Please," Jimmy replied, clearly understanding that something significant was being shared. Chris took a deep breath and spoke directly to the camera. "I visit foster kids because every child deserves to know they're wanted by someone. 89 kids over 6 years, showing them that adults can choose to love them without expecting anything in return." Jimmy's expression changed completely as he grasped what Chris was describing. "Chris, you're visiting children in foster care?" "I'm visiting kids who've been abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect them," Chris replied with quiet conviction. "Kids who've learned not to trust adults, who believe they're unwanted because they've been moved from home to home like furniture nobody wants to keep." Tears were streaming down Jimmy's face. "Can you tell us about one of these children?" "Maria was 8 when I met her," Chris said, his voice becoming tender. "She'd been in 7 different foster homes in 3 years. When I walked into the group home, the first thing she asked me was if I was there to adopt her. When I said I was just visiting, she said, 'Oh, okay. Nobody ever comes just to visit.'" Chris paused, gathering himself to continue. "That broke my heart. This little girl was so used to adults only showing up when they wanted something from her that she couldn't imagine someone spending time with her just because she mattered." "What happened with Maria?" Jimmy asked through his tears. "Maria was eventually adopted by an amazing family," Chris said with obvious joy. "But before that happened, we spent months together. I taught her that adults could be trustworthy, that she was worthy of love, that her past didn't define her future. At her adoption ceremony, she asked me to be there because she said I was the first adult who taught her she was worth choosing." The audience was openly emotional, many people crying as they witnessed this revelation about Chris's private ministry to forgotten children. "Chris, how has this work changed you as a father?" Jimmy asked. "It's taught me that love is a choice you make every day," Chris replied with hard-won wisdom. "These kids taught me that being wanted isn't about being perfect or easy to love. It's about finding people who choose you anyway, who show up consistently, who prove through their actions that you matter." As the segment concluded, something unprecedented happened. The entire studio audience rose in sustained applause that lasted over 4 minutes. But it wasn't just appreciation. It was recognition of something sacred, acknowledgement that they had witnessed true paternal love extended to society's most overlooked children. Chris's revelation became one of the most shared Tonight Show segments in the program's history, inspiring conversations about foster care, adoption, and the responsibility successful people have to support vulnerable children. Most importantly, Chris's disclosure had shown that sometimes the most important family relationships aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones you choose to build with people who need to know they're worth loving.